Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of Doing More with Less, Make It Work with What You've Got. It's a great pleasure to welcome you all here today and continue the conversation from last week, as well as move forward with some more information. So this webinar is hosted by NSCASA, the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault, and the New York State Campus Consent Consortium. My name is Michelle Carroll, and I am the Director of Campus Projects with the New York State Coalition Against Sexual Assault. And before I introduce our speaker today and let her get started on her awesome content, I just want to remind everyone that the consortium has a listserv and working groups, and the working groups will be starting up in September. So if you're interested in joining our listserv or one of our specific professional working groups, please send me an email, and I'll be happy to add you to the listserv or any working group. I'm specifically interested in recruiting students for a student working group. So if you are working with some amazing student activists, either undergrad or graduate level, please email me their names or send me an email introduction. I'd be thrilled to speak with them and learn more about what they're doing. All right, so now before I introduce our speaker, I just have 2 quick polls that I'm going to ask everyone to do. That way I can share this information with my funders, and they'll keep funding me to do this work. So, first question, please let me know what your job title and role most closely corresponds with. Are you a Rape Crisis Center advocate? Are you Title IX coordinator? Are you University Hearing Board member? Are you a Title IX investigator? Are you law enforcement? Are you a student? Are you a state agency representative? If you're none of those things, please use the chat box at your bottom left to tell me what role you have. Awesome. We have someone from the Maine State Coalition, Jane Doe Inc. Awesome. Okay, we still have a couple more people who need to put in their responses. Cool. We have a prevention educator from a university. Awesome. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, so I'm going to use my phone this way because it seems that some of you are having some trouble hearing me. Does that sound better? Awesome. Okay, it looks like we have almost everybody selecting what their role is. Thank you so much. We're going to go to the next poll question. Do you currently feel that your materials are engaging to students? Do you strongly disagree or strongly agree? I'd just like to get a baseline. So we have 5 neutrals, Rebecca.
Okay.
1 strongly agree. Oh, 7 neutrals going up. Give everyone a few more seconds to put their answers in. We have 3 agree, 1 strongly agree. We have 1 disagree. Thank you for your honesty. All right, looks like we have almost everyone. I'll just give it another second, Rebecca.
Okay. So our goal for today will be that you can go back to what materials you have and take it up a notch.
Oh yeah.
Or 2.
Or 2, sure. All right, that looks to be about everyone. So now I'm going to, oh, that's weird. Oops. Okay. Sorry about that. All right, so now I'm going to introduce our speaker for today. We have Rebecca Harrington, who is the health educator at SUNY Oneonta, where she provides leadership to both the No Violence Interpersonal Violence Prevention Committee and the Alcohol and Other Drug Committee. She's perhaps best known on campus for pushing the bubble on creative taglines. And Rebecca has contributed many hours to SUNY systems initiatives, including serving on the Sexual Violence Prevention and Response Task Force on Sexual Violence Prevention Subcommittee for Student Onboarding and Ongoing Education. And in her free time, which I imagine is very little during this time of the year, she enjoys baking biscotti and tackling a wide variety of home improvement adventures. So it is my great pleasure to introduce everyone to Rebecca Harrington, who's going to talk to us about how to make our materials more engaging and exciting for students. So Rebecca, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Yes, and there's not been much biscotti baking as of late, so. But I'm pretty handy with a caulk gun. So we're going to just, there were a couple of slides we didn't get to in part one. So if you're somebody who was present for last week, these are the last few slides we didn't get. And this way we have a complete series for the folks who are watching us on YouTube later. So these are the last couple of slides from last week. So what do brains like and don't like? And so just a refresher, we ended looking at some of the neuropsych research as how it's looking at marketing and how those things intersect, and so taking what the marketing world's already taking advantage of and bringing it into the world of sexual violence. And in my mind, in the marketing world, we're trying to get a consumer to make a behavior of purchasing a product or purchasing a service, and in my mind, we're trying to sell a behavioral change of becoming a better prevention person, whether it's a better bystander or connecting the dots on whatever it is that we want to see in health motivational changes, either personally or at a community level. I think one of the things that is interesting to me is how the brain handles numbers. And when I stumbled across this in a book, it was a real powerful moment because so many of us in the world of sexual violence and domestic violence start our presentations with statistics, trying to get people to engage from the reality of that so many people are impacted by these crimes that we think that we're going to get them to join us based on that. And what it turns out is when we perceive numbers in a couple of different ways, and even though analytically we know that percentages represent a number, when people are presented with the absolute number, it implies a different impact. And so the teal field to the right was, this was never a poster that got published on my campus, but it was a day where I was just kind of having like just one of those needing to wind down after a rough day, and must have just been reading this part of the book and recognizing like, so we have about 6,000 students on campus, and thinking about most of the times we social norm from a perspective of a percentage number, but really thinking about how that impacts, like there's 3,500 SUNY Oneonta students that likely made really healthy decisions about alcohol. And so you can use those numbers for impact. So if you have to provide, say, a grant report and you didn't come out so great, use the percentage because people will tend to minimize the number. So if you're bringing negative news, like go with the percentage. But if you really are wanting to show impact, use those real numbers or do that in real time, and I'll do that with students. So we're talking about 40% of 6,000 students. What number does that really mean? And kind of do it for them in real time. Also using numbers cautiously. So here's some examples that affect our jobs. So back to these starting presentations with statistics, 1 in 15 children will be exposed to interpersonal violence this year. Now, we're extrapolating because we know those personal stories. We're interacting with the people who are experiencing it. So when we read that 1 in 15, our heart's automatically going to Billy in this story. But when we're presenting to people who are trying to engage in interest in the prevention and the response, you might be more impactful to start at the beginning of your presentation with some very real life scenarios, because that's going to connect with people. And there's some really interesting research around that. And we don't have time to dig into it today, but it's pretty impactful in how much money people are willing to give. Also, if you do social norms, This is a little bit more in alcohol land. There's two kinds of norms. There's injunctive norms and descriptive norms. Descriptive norms are just what people do. 55% of people wore jeans to work today. That just is what those people chose to do. But the injunctive norms, where we're talking about how people perceive that choice, those are a little bit more stronger in how we work with them and how we interpret them. So if you're telling students that 50% of students do this, but 75% believe it's a risk when you do that, they're going to believe that 75. It's an opinion thing. It's really kind of interesting. And also, stay away from myth and fact. There was a period of time when Mythbusters was really huge, and a lot of colleges were doing like Mythbuster style social norms. But what happens is, for the most part, people believe the myths. That's the information they already have, and it takes a lot of energy to get a brain to think in a new way. So when you publish that myth and put it on a slide, put it on a poster in front of people, it reinforces that neural circuit of the wrong information. And so even presenting them with the fact afterwards, the myth is still the reinforced piece of information. Making things easy to find, and the example in the book I was reading talked about the toothpaste aisle, so hence we have a picture of the toothpaste aisle. All of the boxes are roughly the same size. They tend to use the same colors. The products are really rather similar, so if you've ever been at the store thinking, oh, I need to try a new kind of toothpaste, and you just end up coming home with the same thing, it's because they call it blindness. It all looks the same. So what I try to do is, when I'm getting ready for a new poster campaign on campus, I try to spend a little time in our student union and several of our academic buildings. We have really big flyer boards. So getting out and seeing what everybody else is doing and then stylistically making some choices that are as far different from those as I possibly can. For those of you who are in the SUNY system, you may have seen this poster, and this was really early on. I developed this poster when SUNY first put together their sexual violence policy in December of 2015. And at that time, we had just shifted our print services on campus, and full color suddenly became really cheap, and nobody was really taking advantage of that. But when they were taking advantage of that, it was still white backgrounds with a colorful thing. So just by shifting to a black background made my poster stand out. And at this point, still a lot of people have not caught on to that. And because I started with this poster, and then I did a few more with my no violence staff and utilizing some of that content, it's become a thing now. And so a black field with really colorful poppy colors on top, I've kind of branded that to my committee, which is nice, because now I don't have to make a lot of style choices as I move forward. I can keep connecting the dots. Anchors, and here's my favorite, Drew Carey, and they do this a lot on Price is Right. What we think something costs, but we have to remember that things cost time as well. So if you're trying to encourage a student to come to a program, they already know, they have an idea how much time they're willing to come. And at most programs, we tend to work within these 1 hour blocks. We've just inherited this time system that has nothing to do with the way the human brain works. We actually do better remembering things in 3 to 5 minutes. But telling students that a program's 45 minutes instead of telling them a little less than an hour might get them to come, because moving away from the description of an hour changes us to something less, and they might be, oh, well, I could come to that. That's less than an hour. It's less than what I thought. If you're recruiting volunteers, make applications really simple. If it's a complicated application, there's this unspoken thing that it's also going to be a complicated thing to volunteer. We want to make it easy, get them in the door, make it really simple to sign up. I have a picture of the Disney balloon there, because I think Disney is a really great example of anchors, is because Disney World's going to be expensive, and you get there, and the first couple hours in the park, everything seems really expensive. But the first time I took my son, who was then 4, to Disney World, at the end of the day, he wanted that balloon, and it was $20, and I didn't think twice. I got my son the Mickey Mouse balloon, and I still have it shriveled up in a drawer at home because I spent $20 on it. Money cues, if you have to do anything with money, we're not all together, so we can't do like a show of hands, but if you can take a guess silently to yourself what type of restaurant menu is more likely to cause you to spend more money. It's the 1-2. It's the smallest thing. It takes up the tiniest little bit visually. And even though all three of those things we can analytically say are the same, we are more likely to spend the $12 when we see it in that very small way. So if you are anyway connected to getting people to donate money, this is a great way to do it. Or, again, instead of writing out 1 hour, write something smaller, write minutes and write 55 or something. Again, you can just kind of play around with those ideas. And decoys, Trojan, Church & Dwight, which produces Trojans. I think Trojan condoms, at the end of the day, the little blue wrapper is a decoy. If you have two deals that are really close and you want to drive somebody towards a better deal, you make one that's just not as good, and the brain feels like it's a winner because it made a really good choice. Now, if you have access because you work on a college campus to a Trojan condom and a Magnum condom, or maybe you're friends with the folks at your local Planned Parenthood, get one of them, take them apart. You can wash them up with a little bit of dish soap and it gets the lubricant off. But if you measure them in every way possible, the Magnums are not really much different in size. The wrapper is significantly larger. They sell a lot more of those. I hand them out for free, and I distribute way more Magnums than I do Trojans. So it's a really great example on the college campus of what a decoy looks like. And the senses, engaging senses. So having something that we connect to a safe time of our lives. I love stuff from the 1950s, hence why I picked this image. 70% of our receptors are in our eyes. So, if you can't find an image that will also send your message, or find an image that's going to grab somebody's attention and pull them in and then put your message in underneath. We don't always have the opportunity to bring smell into our jobs, but I do have an essential oil that I use in all my meditation workshops. I try to have it in my office. So if you want to try to brand a scent, go for it. It might work for you. And then these are just a couple of little fun things that, you want, I'd like to go through old ads and look at what were people thinking. I think this is a really great one to talk about. Norms have changed significantly. So sometimes when it feels like we've got these huge brick walls, at some point this was okay. And here's a sample from a sleep series that we did on my campus. And we did it a bunch of years ago. And unfortunately, all of the artwork that I purchased, and these were all iStock photo images that I used, all for the most part featured white men. And it just seems that this style of photo, it's much easier to find stock photos with white men. Big surprise. But we tried to do a little bit of humor here. People enjoy laughing, and there's people brains like to problem solve. So this was right when e-cards were really huge and kind of making the rounds on Facebook. So we identified a handful of things that we wanted to talk about, the intersection of sleep and one other thing. This was sleep and alcohol. And finding some humorous ways to do that, and then just kind of connecting the dots for people. So a little bit of content, but a really engaging photo with a little bit of a snarky humor. These are some other posters from way back in the day. The Make Love Not Warts was actually one of my associate vice presidents came to me. He's like, I have this really great idea for a tagline. And it took me forever to figure out what the image was that was going to go with it. And then I surprised some intern with her first day of internship with making a peace sign out of condoms. But, again, having an engaging photo, having a little bit of humor, that's what we've kind of branded out of my office here. So moving on, we're going to look at some of the graphic design tips and tricks. I've got a little bit of a background with doing some of these things, and not because of anything I purposefully chose to do. It's just my own magical professional career journey involved some of this stuff, and my partner was an art editor for the book industry for a long time, so I have access to somebody you can have these conversations with. So font is really, really important. When it's good, it's really good, and when it's bad, it's really bad. So we're going to just go really quick. I think font is one of these rabbit holes that I absolutely love. It's really, there's all these little things that we can use to describe how a font works. There's cap height, and there's X height, which is the top if you went to elementary school and practiced your letters, X height is usually that dotted line that goes down the middle, and it's the top height of most of our lowercase letters. There's a baseline, and then like that letter Y has what's called a descender. And so when you're picking a point size for fonts, if you've ever noticed that when you change fonts, even though the point size stays the same, everything shifts around. That's what it's relating to. So font size and points is from the very bottom, the very lowest part of the lowest possible letter to the very topmost top letter. So depending on how a font sign gets put together, that's what's going on. There's even more little ways to look at things. There's stems, there's finials, there's counters, all of these fun little things. If you're trying to match a font, like say you want to imitate something and you're not sure what it is, finding something unique like that terminal of the lowercase f in beef is a great way to quickly identify if a font's going to match. You find something unique within that font. Kerning is the space between letters in a horizontal way, and these are things that can assist reading and sometimes hinder reading. Every font is different, and sometimes you'll find, and it's just a random thing between two letters in a font, in this case 2 capital T's in a row. It's not something that happens a lot, but occasionally it shows up, and you might want to get in there and create some space. So here's a few examples of, and these are, if you find these amusing, you can go onto Google image search and just kind of when fonts go bad. These are both situations where kerning would have fixed the issue. So kerning is when it's between two letters. Tracking is when it's between all of the letters. So spacing is often what it's referred to. I believe in Microsoft Word there's tight tracking or loose tracking. And sometimes if you need to create a little bit more space, say in a newsletter, or fill up a little space, these are places that you can play with a little bit. Here again is another example where tracking makes a big difference on how things get read. It would have helped a little bit there. And then leading is the horizontal space. So a lot of us are familiar with leading in the sense of single space or double space. But again, here's another thing where you can control with a lot of accuracy in graphic design programs, and you can play around to what's readable, what fills up the space. We like to balance white space around our letters and our words. So those are other things you can take a look at when you're playing around with stuff. So again, making things easy to read is really a big part of creating interesting posters or brochures, especially when we want people to engage with the content and a lot of reading. Within the world of font, there's two major categories. There are the serif fonts and the sans serif fonts. Serifs are the little horizontal ticks, Times New Roman. If it's got Roman after it, that's going to often mean that it's got serifs. A Gothic font will be a sans serif font. They were developed to help people read because it provides horizontal flow to the graphic design. So if you want to make something very easy for people to read, you want to use a serif font, but in something like a resume or a CV, the preference would be to go with a sans serif font because it actually slows you down, and it's milliseconds. It's really tiny little bits, but in a situation where you want somebody to read every little bit of something and engage it that slightly longer, even though it's really tiny, you go with sans serif fonts. Now this is opposite in the world of electronics. Serif fonts are harder to read in an electronic medium. So you can keep that in mind if you're planning website development, thinking about, maybe memes, there's a little place to go because there's often not very many words in some of those kinds of things. Other classifications are this black letter, which are generally very stylistic, very logo-y kinds of fonts. They're not ones that you're going to write a whole letter in. But, they have their place. Like maybe on a certificate, there's a good place to put that. Or if you're trying to get somebody to emotionally connect in a very specific way, a font like that might be the right way to go. And doing things in script and fancy. And I have a son who's in elementary school, and I occasionally get messages home from the school, and the entire page is written in one of these scripty things, and it drives me nuts. It's really difficult to read. It takes takes those extra milliseconds to process, and as a working mom, it's like my brain is somewhat aware that this is taking up more time than it should. So I think we kind of covered this as we went. So on the bottom right, you can see, and this was actually found when I Googled it, like as worst possible uses of font. I thought it was ironic that it came up when I was putting this together for sexual violence, that was the one that got chosen. And on the far left, it's not coming through, but when I print this on campus, I actually use the Star Wars font. There's lots of places where you can get free fonts online, and you can have some fun with those if you can connect the dots for people. So we hand out buttons that say, "May the Force be with you," but still use a condom in Star Wars font, and that can, little fun things. We have a button. I have what we call the Hump Day wagon on campus, which is a red wagon that I have student volunteers pull around on Wednesdays, and it's full of condoms, and we always try to have some kind of pop culture reference, consent message, or reason to use a condom message. And so those are fun. So when you have to mix fonts, you can look for type families. TWCen is one of my favorites, but font families would be kind of the normal version, the italics, the bold italics. Some font families are really broad and wide, and those are a great way because then they all are automatically matched for you. Here's some of my no violence stuff. I use, trying to think, Kazuka Gothic Bold is the font that I use for all my no violence stuff. So you can see here where it exists in a bold, it exists in kind of a thinner version. The no violence logo always exists the way it does in that black field in the lower right corner, where the NO is a little bit thinner than the rest of the letters. So that's just everything I do for no violence comes out in that font. Here's again places where mixing fonts, it's an art. You have to really spend some time looking at it. I think the drapery rod is a really great example of your brain has to shift gears, although subtly, like you read it as drapery, but sometimes there's that second glance because that D is so different. Your brain has to stop and pause, and it's almost interpreting another language every time you switch fonts. Here's another place where fancy isn't always better, things that just don't seem to work. Joe and Bob's Gutter Repair. It's really hard to read, and it's really kind of a messy font. Like, what's the gut feeling that comes with that? Like, are these people capable of doing gutter repair? Like, what's the service going to be? Because this font is so awkward and hard to read. So guidelines for choosing fonts. Does it match the mood? Sometimes you want to have a fun thing, and how big is it going to be? If you spend a lot of time at the computer, it's really important to print stuff up. And I feel like at some point, like your brain just can't process it anymore. So a lot of times, if I'm working on something at the end of the day, I'll print it out and I'll try not to look at it anymore. But then I'll tape it up in a place where I see it first thing when I walk in the morning or the first thing on Monday. I'll hang it on the wall where I'm going to catch it out of the side of my eye and not catch it face on first thing, just to test things out. Great to ask lots of people, whoever you have access to. Limit yourself to 1 or 2 fonts. One serif and one serif is a great way to go together. These are really great examples. So again, the font families on the right and the middle column, lower ones, you can see how those 2 fonts that clash with each other, they're both just different enough that your brain has to stop and think about things. And that's what we want to make it easy for that brain to read everything that's there. And just kind of like the toothpaste style, when it's too complicated, our brain shuts off. You tend not to read everything that exists. And I see so many posters on campus that I would say fall into this. It's like you need to make up your mind and pick 1 or 2 fonts, decide what is the most important message that's going to come through, and make that be the one that comes through. And I think also issues that I see commonly on campus are images. And I think we're so used to looking at images now, especially our students, where their days are full of looking at images on social media, but it's in a very small screen at very close range. And those same pictures that work really well on our phones don't necessarily translate to the poster board. And so there's a lot of times you'll be like, what the heck is that? And you have to get really close to see it, and it's not as eye-grabbing as you maybe hoped it would be. So here's kind of a history of how we got to the No Violence logo that I use today. And on the left is really one of the early sheets where we knew that we wanted that NO to be different. We weren't sure how it was going to be different. We played around with matching up different fonts. And then at the end, choosing to stay within that same font family and just playing around with the thickness of the letters. And then when it appears in color, we have a teal stripe and a purple stripe, teal being the sexual assault awareness color, purple being the domestic violence awareness color. So we're bringing those things into what we're doing without kind of reinventing the wheel. So thinking about having a font that you can consistently use. Now, as a college, we have a font that is kind of the official college font, and things that go out from our campus to the world at large all need to be in that same font, but I have some autonomy for what I do within, and so like I said, I picked a font and I've stuck with it, and I think that's important. I always encourage that. So I want to talk a little bit about color theory here and it translating across programs. For most of us, our color theory, we got red and yellow and blue are the primary colors when we were kids, and if you mix red and yellow, you get orange, and yellow and green, and or yellow and blue, and you get green, and so all those standard things. But tints and shades and tones, I mean, I love going to the paint section at Lowe's and Home Depot, and I'll spend forever in front of those paint chips trying to pick exactly the right one. But if you've ever painted a room in your house, you know how important it is. You can't just pick out the one in the store. You have to bring home that chip, and you hang it on the wall in the room that you want to paint, and you kind of check how the daylight hits that space, and what does it look like at different times of the day, and how does it look at night with the lighting you have in that room. And the same shade that looks so amazing in the store might not be exactly the right shade at home. So again, printing stuff out and seeing what it looks like in real space. Now, beyond the elementary school red, yellow, blue, there's two forms of color systems that your computer has access to. There's the CMYK system, which is a print media color system, and then there's the RGB, which is light system. So if you've ever noticed, if I was born in the mid-70s, if you grew up in the 80s and ever got really close to a TV, or if you remember those big, huge computer monitors we used to have back in the day, if you looked really closely, you could see that there was red and green and blue dots. And those are the primary colors when you work in light. So if you work in a program like InDesign or a desktop publishing program and you're getting something ready to go to print, if it's coming out in print, you want to make sure you're using a CMYK system. And if it's going to be electronic and online, you want to be an RGB system. And if you need to translate, there's all kinds of charts. There's a really color.adobe.com, and I'm pretty sure I have that link somewhere in one of these slides. There's a really great program if you need to translate. If somebody sends you something and you want to make it go back. But the reason I bring these up, because sometimes you kind of stumble across these things, and you can if you love math, you can come back and check out this decimal versus hexadecimal versus binary. It's a very interesting numbering system, and it's the way your computer interprets everything. But on the very right, you can see our standard 8 colors, what it looks like in an RGB numbering system. So a value between 0 and 255. So that first is the measure of red, then comma, then the measure of green, then comma, and then the measure of blue. And that's how that message gets sent through. Those numbers get translated into the hexadecimal system. So if you're building a website, these are what you're seeing. Hexadecimal uses the digits 0 through 9, and then the letters A to F to get us up to 16 possible digits. And so that's what that FF looks like. So FF0000. There's a direct relationship to the RGB system. And then the CMYK system is the cyan, magenta, yellow, black that you're probably familiar with if you have a color printer. And because there's blue and they're black and they're both B words, we use C for cyan and K for black. So context is important, and I'm sure you've seen these kinds of things in the past where in these pairs of circles, the middles are actually the same shade, but changing the shade around that makes it interpret differently. So again, thinking about where you're going to use things. Are you going to print it out and it's going to go on a shirt? Is it going on a pen? Where is it going to be? And that might change how a color decision gets made. And then coming up with color schemes and how do you want to pull things together. You might have a lot of autonomy in this, or you might have something that was given to you. But like my campus is a red campus, and sometimes I might say, okay, we're going to go standard red and gray, red and black, red and white. Or sometimes I might shift, like say a shirt campaign and go more towards a maroon and say, okay, it's close to the red, but this is going to give me some other places where I can connect. And with my no violence stuff, I use very poppy colors on black, so more like that triadic example there. Really different, but they all work together because you kind of push them to be together. And here's what that color.adobe.com tool looks like. And if I lose you at any point today, like click in there. It's a free tool. It is so much fun to play with. At the bottom of that screenshot, it says, on the bottom left, it says RGB, and there's a little arrow there to the left of that. When you click on that, it'll drop down and it'll give you a bunch more coloring systems, and that's where you can get the CYMK. So if you know how to identify a color that you found somewhere and you want to translate it into a different coloring system, you can do that. And there's all kinds of color psychology. The full thing that this blue part came from, all the colors exist, are on that link that's provided on the slide. There's a lot of people that say, there's a lot of research that says this is stuff's legit, and then there's a lot of research that say it's not so much. So if you have a reason for picking a color, as long as you have a reason, that might be a good enough reason. But some of these color psychology things do exist, and again, if it's a rabbit hole that appeals to you, go for it. I mean, I think this is an interesting thing, and I've seen students use this slide in a lot of presentations in our communication department. And they connect all of these colors with very specific things. But I think for me, the point is that there are major logos that exist in every single color. And I don't, the fact that Oreo is blue and McDonald's is yellow, Nabisco is red, I think there's fun stuff in all of them. There's sodas and foods and important businesses across all of those different things. So if it has a connection to you, then it makes sense to roll with it. So picking a color. So this is a sample from our SUNY Oneonta campus style guide. If you work for a college campus, you might have been given a style guide and say these are the colors you get to use, and those are good reasons to use those colors because somebody wants you to keep branding the college. Or maybe you have a connection to something else. So we host the SUNY Pride Conference here at SUNY Oneonta. So we're looking always, we connect rainbows with pride, so finding a logo that connects those rainbow colors made sense in that situation. Like I said, our No Violence logo connects the teal and the purple back because of the important larger national movements. And we all know in October when we see a pink ribbon what's going on. So there are some very branded things that maybe occasionally make sense to hop on to something else that already exists. And then there's also something called the Pantone forecast, and people are always like really amazed by Pantone. If you've ever noticed that around the same time of year you can go into a Target and all of the bowls and towels are this new fun color, and then you go to Walmart a week later and all the towels and bowls and tchotchkes there are the same colors. And you might start to connect the dots that, gee, something's going on, and it's this organization, Pantone. It's an industry standard tool for the production of color in printed materials, and they have a forecast. They have colors of the year, and they have a forecast that is seasonal. So if you're just trying to pick out something, you really aren't emotionally connected to anything or just kind of looking to come up with a great idea, you can find the Pantone forecast several seasons in advance. I'm pretty sure the summer 2019 colors have already been chosen. So even if you're planning that far ahead, you can look at what the forecast is. And my personal thought is if some corporation is spending millions and billions of dollars to make people jump on these colors, people are going to be cued to that, and you're going to get through the clutter a little bit because you're going to be the same color as the towels and bowls at Target when you decide to come out with them. So putting it together, this is a little fun thing. This is a fun thing to do in person, but logos have very specific colors and fonts, and you probably right off the bat can name a couple of those brands that go with those alphabets. So what can you do to make yourself have that same thing, and I think I mentioned last week, Coke bottles, when they designed their original green glass bottles, their charge to glass makers was, we're going to give somebody a contract for making Coke bottles, but the design that we want is something that even when it's broken, people can identify it as a Coke bottle, and that was the problem to solve that this one guy came up with and built that beautiful green Coke bottle that we all know and recognize. So can some part of your thing connect back? So thinking about hierarchy, if you're somebody with graphic design experience, you know this stuff already, but I think about when I'm designing a poster, if somebody's only going to read one thing, what's that one thing going to be? And ideally, how many levels can your poster maintain fidelity at? Like, I want people to connect something right away. That's a no violence poster. But if I've got a particular event going on, oh, no violence is doing an event. And then getting in a little bit deeper and a little bit deeper. So every time you change font size, there's a message there that still kind of exists like that Coke bottle. You could see part of that poster. You can engage with it with a split second or 10 seconds or a minute. And the basic idea is still going to remain the same. This is a sample poster for my campus, and this was a student designed poster. BART is our Bias Acts Response team on campus, and they did a poster contest to come up with some designs. And you can see here that we got a lot of different, we have a really engaging photo, and I love it. I think it was such a great idea to talk about, like, biased acts are usually the ones that everybody sees go down, but nobody knows what to do or how to intervene. So I think it was a very clever image choice, but we have so many fonts here, it's really hard to know where to start. We have vertical letters, which are really difficult to read, filling up a lot of space, so it takes a lot of weight in there. So being able to pick stuff apart, go to the local flyer board and look at what works and what doesn't work and spend a little time. Like, why did one thing capture my attention? What was the thing that captured my attention? And what's something that I don't like, and spending the time like, well, okay, there's a lot of fonts. There's a color that doesn't make sense. There's a photo that doesn't make sense. Or the photo really makes a lot of sense, but it's not given the weight that it deserves. Thinking about readability, and again, spend some time. Anything that you're going to print out in real size and hang it in a location similar to where you expect it to be, and walk by it. And sometimes you have to let things go for a couple of days and come back to it with fresh eyes. Placement of content, going from left to right. If you have a magazine handy, or the next time you have access to a magazine hanging out at the doctor's office, these are things you can check. The eye tends to sweep in a Z pattern, and you'll find a lot of companies will put their logo in the bottom right-hand corner for that reason. It's the last thing you see on that page. But we have this really great left to right movement. We have a tagline, we have a powerful image, and we have a logo, and it's a real natural movement for the eye to see all those things. The other thing that Mini Cooper gets right is humans are really adept at finding faces, and Mini Coopers have a really sweet, fun face as a car, and so the angle of that car gives us that opportunity to see that face. The golden ratio, and there's a video in the video slides that we emailed out earlier today, which really gets into this Fibonacci sequence in the golden ratio, and it shows up over and over and over again in the art we create. It shows up in music, it shows up in sculpture, it shows up in architecture, and it's kind of how nature just shows up too. And it's a really great, fun TEDx video where he really goes into the nuts and bolts of this. But again, these are other places where we can work. There are shapes that we just tend to have a gut instinct that we're drawn towards. So can you pull those into your work? This is another place, the 0.618 ratio, and this very famous Michelangelo sketch, Leonardo da Vinci sketch, is a really great example that even humans, like where our navel is it's a little bit more than half. And so are we creating in our own image? I don't know. So it's a really fun, maybe a little bit math nerdy, which I will admit to being. But it's a fun place to go, and it might give you some ideas. So if you're looking for inspiration, Getty Images does this visualtrends.gettyimages.com, and they'll kind of talk about what the current image trends are. Occasionally, once you kind of get into their system, they'll send links for little cute, quick webinars, and they're always fun to watch, listening to people who are photographers talking about this stuff, and it gives you some ideas. And I feel like all the time I'll watch their webinars and be like, oh yeah, I saw that. I did notice that, but now it's on my radar, and I have a term and I have a category, and I can think about using it. I do buy a lot of stock art from Shutterstock. I think their prices are fair for what they have, and there's just so much. You can get so many ideas. My mom was doing some quilting with fall leaves, and she wanted to maybe do some hand stitching to allude to the wind, and she just wasn't sure what to do, and so we searched wind, and we just saw lots and lots of ideas. So it's not even that you're going there to purchase something, but just to kind of trigger the creativity mode. And then I will often do Google searches, graphic design trends of 2018. You can be very specific: print design trends, web design trends, color trends, font trends. And I often will sometimes go back and look at stuff from the 40s or the 50s. There's a real shift in the fonts from around the 50s, kind of post-World War II. And so we do, in our collective social conscious, have the ability to kind of identify when certain fonts were trendy, and so you can play with that. So putting it all together, how are you going to brand? So what comes first, a chicken or a puppy? Do you have a campaign or a brand? In my case, I ended up with a campaign first, well before I was really thinking about having a brand. But we did this really fun thing at SUNY Oneonta, and it was kind of just a whim thing. And this was right as David Lisak's research was hitting the mainstream, where we were really starting to talk about the characteristics of perpetrators. And we wanted to do a T-shirt campaign. Meanwhile, in the alcohol land at SUNY Oneonta, we had some large state grants, and we had gotten a lot of money, and we were doing a lot of stuff with T-shirts. And so we were realizing that for our campus, a couple hundred T-shirts that were carefully designed would be popular, and students would wear them. So we designed these T-shirts that were what we ended up calling the Rethink campaign. That on the front, they were white T-shirts with black ink, and Rape Stop Rapist, very provocative front. And then on the back, we had all this conversation around these old messages like don't get drunk and don't walk alone, and flipping them into how would we make that into a perpetrator blaming statement, or a perpetrator holding the responsibility for the act. And we chose at that point to have different people write them, because when you use handwriting, and a lot of different handwriting, it does start to have a voice, like a human was behind that. It wasn't just a very mechanical thing. And we realized right away that we couldn't just hand out these very provocative T-shirts to students. We were going to need to do some kind of educational thing, which I knew was going to land all on me, and I was freaked out at the thought of trying to reach 600 students. And so we decided to develop a video. And it was right when the Prop 8 videos were hitting California, and there were these very fun, poppy people coming in and out. And so we did the video, and I was like, all right, so now I have this opportunity to do some really good evaluation, and I've got some hidden slides in the PowerPoint that you'll be able to see. I didn't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I think one of the things I really walked away with is we asked them before and after the video how likely they were to talk with various different groups of people about sexual assault. And we saw kind of this increase across different types of groups of people. I think especially other friends and acquaintances, they were much more likely or very likely to talk with people. And we knew that giving somebody a shirt was then going to be the catalyst for them to have those conversations. So students they pre-tested, they watched this very short video that ended up being about 7 minutes. And then they post-tested, and then we sent them a T-shirt, and we kind of measured how their day went when they wore their shirt. 99% of the people who did the follow-up did say that they had worn their shirts, which was great. It was probably, that was a convenience sample. But when we asked them about how many conversations they had when they wore their shirt, it was 4.7. So I can't remember. I think we had 150 respond. So 150 times 5 conversations, that's a lot more people than I would ever talk to in a day. And then this whole, did wearing the shirt make you feel like you had a positive effect? And so a lot of good feelings came from that. So it was this real shift, so that for me, it was this moment of like, nobody's for violence, everybody's against violence. but we don't often give them a really easy opportunity to advertise that fact. It might be, 100 down in the things they care about, so it's not something that comes up in conversation all the time, but they care enough about it that they'll sign up for the free shirt and they'll wear it on that day. So beginning to shift from a little bit more kind of the standard, the victim-centric, this black and white, very statistic-y kind of thing, to this idea that we can totally do this if we work together. More bright colors, less numbers, and again, this assumption that everybody wants to end violence, but they just might not be sure exactly what their role is in that. And so that was kind of the beginning of our shift from our old program into what became the No Violence program. So where did No Violence come from? So we spent a year, we're like, we need to rebrand. So we did like this whole, we're going to do a mission statement, we're going to do a vision statement, and maybe somewhere in there we're going to end up with a name. We knew we did not want a name that became an acronym. So it needed to be short, it needed to connect people to the information. And during that whole year, we had the success of the End Rape t-shirts, and we wanted to do more shirts. And we talked about what are the things that students need to know? What are the terms and definitions that we just really feel are so important that everybody on this campus needs to know so that we can talk about them? And my counselors really drove this conversation because they could talk about like coercion. For women who were coming into counseling or men that were coming into counseling who just didn't have the language to describe what had happened to them as sexual assault because they saw, well, I was drinking, well, I could have done this, I could have done that, and recognizing that some of these things we just needed to make part of our campus conversation. And that was right as infographics were getting really huge and huge enough and far enough into infographics being huge that we were starting to see some research that brains really like to engage with infographics. And I'm sure many of you will remember kind of that moment when we got there. So we started developing all these t-shirt backs, which we're going to see in the next couple slides. But we needed something what we wanted on the front. And so what we had learned from previous shirt campaigns with our alcohol program is if you put something catchy on the front, people would wear it again. Maybe a little bit snarky, a little bit suggestive, but that's what would get them to wear it again. And then we could put a lot of content on the back because we would get reports from students that they would be bored in class and they would read the back of the shirt of the student sitting in front of them. And so I feel like that's dead time. Like that's mine to take advantage of. And those of us who are familiar with the public health concepts of dosing, I'm personally very captivated by the idea of microdosing. What's the smallest amount of something that you need to put in front of somebody to keep that dot and keep that ball in play? So these shirts have worked out really well for us. And so I was driving home one day. I have a 20-mile, roughly 35-minute commute through rural New York. And about a mile from my house, I don't know how it popped into my head, but this idea of no violence, of kind of the KNOW part of like, you have to know it to recognize it to be able to stop it, kind of early bystander stuff, right? You have to recognize what's going on as a problem. And if you don't have the terms and the understanding of what it is that you saw, then you certainly aren't in a place where you can even begin to talk about knowing what to do to stop it. So really pushing us, you have to recognize it to get there. Sorry, my 1 hour of quiet on my phone just ran out. And then this play on the word no, that phonetically your brain, when you read it, your brain is hearing it. So you hear the N-O part of no. And when we played around with it, the initial gut feeling was to make the N-O bolder than the rest of it, but it was almost too aggressive. We've kind of laughed about it now. There is some in the brain research talking about the jokes that Shakespeare wrote into his play that are a lot of these play on words, things that our brains light up in the MRI when we're reading that stuff or hearing that stuff, that it's a puzzle and our brains like to solve puzzles. So this dual meaning is fun. So it was just one of those things I found afterwards. I'm like, oh, well, maybe that's why we liked it so much. But I think the other part, too, in my mind, of why the N-O in the lighter font works is, to me, it reminds me of like when your mother is so mad at you, she doesn't even scream at you. She just says your name very silently, and you know you're in it deep at that point. Like, I think it has a little bit of that play, too. So these are some of the shirt backs, and these are not, well, I think the consent one and our cycle of violence one, the purple one in the upper right, those ones pretty much the same format we went right from the beginning. Our interpersonal violence one has gone through a couple of upgrades, trying to they're always a little bit messy when you try to simplify them. But this is where we're at. So we have these shirts, and the terms go with the different colors. So green is interpersonal violence and Rebecca Land. But again, creating just some common places where we can talk, and feel free to use this artwork. If you need me to send you JPEGs, I'm happy to share them. I use them in slides all the time, so it's consistent on campus on how we utilize this stuff. I think the cycle of violence is great, but sometimes because it's a tool that we use on kind of the inside knowledge track, having a simple version of it is important for students. The next slide here. Our stalking one, which I haven't figured, I'm still not in love with my stalking one, but there's so much important information. I haven't been able to decide how to make it a little bit less at this point. And then our coercion one has gone through a couple of revisions as well. But this kind of this flow chart idea of, if you're doing these things, you need to stop doing them. And also connecting again, sexual assault within the realm of all possible sexual interactions. It's not the good one, but connecting the dots and using this opportunity to be like, are you sober? Have you given consent? Good job, go get protection. And then here's our harassment. And I feel like this year with harassment, I hit a real big moment. I think for those of us who work on college campuses, we talk about quid pro quo and the hostile or offensive environment because those are the two Title IX protected forms of harassment. But I think street harassment is something that happens with equal amounts on campus. And so kind of getting myself to walk away from the Title IX version and the not Title IX version, and really just thinking through what the experiences of students are and giving them 3 equal weighted spaces. And then you might recognize a power and control wheel there on the right, so using a broken heart to connect the dots with that. So how the campaign evolved, so these images are printed on the backs of shirts. They all just say simply no violence on the front. They're those 7 different poppy colors that you saw as the background. The year 1, we had just come from Green Dot training not too long before that, so we identified our early adapters in Greek life, every athletic team, our Res Life staff, a couple of other pockets on campus. Those students got all 5 shirts that we ran with that year. And we gave them windows of time. Say, hey, wear the green shirt either Tuesday or Wednesday this week, whatever day you're going to be on campus more, the most classes, the most places where you're going to interact with people, wear it on that day. And we just did that. They were allowed to keep what they wanted at the end or give away to friends and send back what they didn't use. And it was a real end of the spring. It wasn't the greatest of launch, but we we connected with people, and that was good. So then the next year, I was really curious, like, how many shirts do I need? How many people wearing the same shirt on campus do I need for people to kind of connect? And I had a really great psychology intern that year, and so we did this design of, we did 5 weeks of shirt wearing. The first week, there was only 100 people with shirts. The second week, we had 200 people. We also used those shirt wearers to recruit some of the next couple weeks worth of shirt wearers. And then we did intercept surveys on campus all the day afters. And we found that once we had 200 students wearing shirts on a campus of 6,000, we had pretty good returns on our intercept surveys that people had noticed that there were a lot of people wearing the same shirt and that they could answer correctly as to what the concept behind the shirt was. I mean, it wasn't super accurate, but it wasn't like they were selling pizza. It was violence prevention related. And then we've done a lot of different shifts. We did a lot of just recruiting at tables to get students to sign up to wear shirts, and then having just one day where we had 600 or 700 people wearing shirts. And in upstate New York, sometimes you get really gray, rainy days, and it's very sad, but every so many years we get like this really beautiful sunny day, and there's all of these students wearing these really bright colored shirts, and it's so amazing. And then last year, we took it up a notch and getting ready for a major shift, which will take place this year. And we recruited students in squads. So I went into spaces like Greek life and I said, I need a squad for every Greek life sorority and fraternity. And I gave them, similar to like a magic band box, I gave them a larger box that had 7 little tiny boxes inside of it, and it was a sign-up kit. So there was one leader in each of these social groups, so athletic teams, residence halls, student groups. Our marketing club bought into this great. I've got a great video that they sent me of their advisor wearing a shirt, and he's a much older faculty member, so it's this really fun thing that they did as a group. So we recruited in squads, and so the goal is that this spring what will happen is we're going to recruit those squads. Now that we have that kind of variable figured out about how to do that well, we're going to recruit before our spring break so that when we come back, they'll have their squad connection, but they're also going to have a connection by color. So each squad is made up of one of each of the 7 different shirts. Those students are going to receive social media posts to push out. So the thought being is then you can do a little competition amongst the colors, and I'll be recruiting faculty and staff on campus to be group leaders for those different colors. But then within their squads, I know that they're linked through social media so that even though it might only have 7 people from a 50-member fraternity signed up to be part of this campaign, they're all going to have access to each other's social media. So we're going to push some of that educational content. So we have a lot of the social media already designed, and it mimics the designs of the shirts. I'm well known for pushing the limits. I think Michelle mentioned that in my bio. This is a bumper sticker that we started with here on campus that exists as a keychain now. I also have stickers. Our students really love this, and I've in the long run ended up with 0 complaints. I don't know if I'm just super lucky or the complaints just haven't gotten to me, although that never really seems to happen. I was prepared to respond with things like, oh, I know, it's so offensive. We have to talk about this in the 21st century. But I've just not had to use it. I've met more people because people seek me out because they want the stickers or the keychain. So it's been a really good conversation starter. And I've had students come back and say, can I have one of those stickers? My mom really likes it. So it's been a really great, fun connection with folks. So here's some of the print media. So we saw the consent poster earlier. There's a Bill of Rights poster that follows the same thing, and I believe SUNY pushes these ones out as well. And on my no violence website, the oneonta.edu/no violence, you can there's a SUNY resources page, and you can download PDFs of both of those posters in large format and in letter size. And then on the far right is another thing that we've done, which is our map to resources. So again, the same colors. This is a little bit more complicated design, and so it comes as part of it folds in half and then folds again into a trifold brochure, but trying to get students to connect which offices can get them to which resources on campus. So again, using those same colors and connecting people back. And so where are you going to put your messages to get bang for your buck? So get stolen, make clever posters. The one on the right is my Dalmatian dog. She totally was the poster child of this cause. This was one of the first posters I made on campus, and they got stolen all the time, and the residence hall directors and the RAs would be so upset. I'm like, it's okay. Like, they're putting this in their room. There was also some more education at the bottom of those. So yeah, if you have something fun and clever, students might want it, and they'll put it in another space. That's a good thing. How to be everywhere. Stickers are really cheap. Mirror clings are cheap. Magnets are cheap. Buttons. If you can invest in a button maker, it's a really great thing because there may be $300 a piece to buy the button, but then you can buy parts to make 1,000 buttons for like $50 or $60. So you have the ability to turn something around. So I think when the bombing took place at that news place in Paris a few years ago, like, I had students who were really bothered by that, and they came in and they wanted to do something, and I was able to give them the button maker, and they made some really sweet Eiffel Tower buttons to hand out to folks. So it allowed us to have really quick response on that issue. So that's another thing. If you work on a college campus or you're connected with your college campus door hangers, you can buy blank door tags and print information on them, and you can get those out. And we'll do that a couple of times a year on campus, where right before St. Patrick's Day, which is a big drinking holiday for our campus. That's a time when we'll put some information and get them hung up on doors. I have something called a banner pen, and So I'm sorry that the video is not working today. It's very sad. A banner pen has a little thing. It's like a little Venetian shade on the barrel of your pen, and it pulls out. And you can see on the right, the front and back of the banner pens I currently am using. There's a lot of real estate on that, and you can put a lot of content on that. And I like to hand those out to students and be like, hey, you might not need that pen, but throw that one in your backpack. And so when somebody asks to borrow a pen in class, you've got one, but you're also passing around this information with these very important phone numbers on it. I have a lot of faculty that I'll send a dozen pens out to at the beginning of the year because all the resources are on it, and they have it on their desk, and it's easy. They don't lose track of it. The information is where they need it to be for when that student shows up in their office. Anything that is useful on campus is a good thing. Cell phone pockets are great. You can pre-stuff those with information cards. I actually have a bunch of them now that I have stuck on I have a hutch on my desk, and I keep extra business cards in them, and I have them sorted by like how I know that person. So instead of like the old-fashioned Rolodex, I use those cell phone pockets. So having extra ones isn't a bad thing. They're handy for other things. I also invested in a t-shirt press probably 5 or 6 years ago now at this point, and I can make shirts a lot cheaper than purchasing them. It's a investment of time, but if anybody wants to have that conversation, I'm happy to do that with you. It's not if you have a tiny little bit of DIY in you, you're totally capable of doing these kinds of things. And so recruiting people to be message spreaders. So the way my office is designed, I have an intern team, and I also work with some student groups. So psychology club, they pull my hump day wagon around for me, and in turn I buy their cords for them at graduation. So where they used to have bake sales to raise that money, now they're doing something that's a little bit more in line with what their mission is. So I work with our anthropology club. I work with pre-health club. We have a women in gender studies. We have a gender and sexuality resource group. So looking a little bit deeper into the different types of student groups you might have on campus that would have some intersection, and there's a lot of intersection with violence. We have a criminal justice club, all of these different places where a little bit more knowledge is going to support those students as well in if you can connect it with their career trajectory, that's a really helpful thing. And then just kind of students in general. So we'll do some tabling days where my interns will help get tables set up across campus, but then a student group will adopt a table. So Anthropology Club, their major kind of exists in one academic building, and they'll just run a table for 2 hours in that building. But I know by them having their club members at that table in that particular building, they're more likely to have more interactions because the people coming to classes know those students. So it kind of remove some of the awkwardness of engaging somebody in a conversation. So we'll try to we have roughly 15 buildings on campus, so we'll try to get a student group to adopt each of those different buildings for a couple hours in a day, and then my interns are running all the content around on those days. I need to give you guys the video link for this. I pulled it up and I probably lost it. So I'm going to put this in the chat at the end. I will load it up. So this is kind of a freebie, so check out the video. If you go buy some party cups, this is a really great one to do at a table. So here's some of the things that we're doing with our alcohol programming. This one on the left, which it's actually a magnetic board. If you go to Lowe's, you can buy for $10, you can buy a sheet of galvanized metal, and you can put it inside a picture frame. And you have to buy galvanized metal, not aluminum, because galvanized metal is magnetic. And if you have a button maker, you can buy button sets. But if you have any of those random like business card magnets that we tend to collect, you can just glue some paper on top of that, and you're in business with some custom-made magnets. So asking students to kind of interact. So those 4 orange things say things like loss of shyness, poor judgment, slurred speech, needs help walking. So we were asking students if they could identify where those behaviors fall on a BAC wagon. So just kind of connecting the dot, but it's a tactile experience. So that's helpful, the magnet board. And so we have just that printout is just a poster piece of paper on top of this galvanized metal. It's not glued, it's all just all together because of that picture frame. On the right is we do a lot of purchasing through Oriental Trading. They have a lot of carnival game kinds of things. They're really garishly bright colors. So what we did is we just used, you can buy chalkboard contact paper for a fairly cheap price. I got this stuff on Amazon, and you can just cover the whole back with that. And then we do a lot of laminating and Velcroing, so we can use these in a lot of different ways. So in this particular case, we're asking students, can you identify, you spin the wheel, did the thing you land on help you get sober? Yes or no? Time obviously is the winner in this one. So, but doing that to ask a question, again, giving people some of a tactile experience. I truly believe that being on a college campus, we spend so much time in lecture halls that giving students a tactile experience when they're interacting with us on the quad is a way to get around that. On the left is a Plinko board, and I had a student a bunch of years ago who did a lot of nutrition programming for me, and he was the first one who kind of figured out how to do Plinko board tabling. But you can connect all of those little boxes that the chips can land in to some kind of piece of information. So can you get 3 different things? He did one with fiber, and so each little box at the bottom had a line that connected it to a picture of a food, and the goal was, did you get 20 grams of fiber, 30 grams of fiber between all these foods? And we had things like broccoli and Pop-Tarts and just random things that college students might stumble across in their day. So kind of connecting the dots between what's a high fiber food and a not high fiber food. In this case, plan is how we help students develop a safety plan for when they go out and drink. So again, thinking about, connecting the dots, how do we want to show, drive students to content? On the right is kind of the standard beanbag box. Again, really cheap things you can buy. And so on the beanbags, we printed out information. I used my t-shirt press to press it onto some fabric, which we then safety pinned to our beanbags, and then we're asking students to match them to a spot in the box. Duck ponds are great. Again, you can number the I think actually these ducks came with numbers on the bottom, so it's just that's the question you're going to answer. Pull out a duck, and you pull out duck number 3, you're going to get asked question number 3. And then this, I think we're kind of at the end here. This was kind of like a real fabulous synergistic moment with students this last year. We wanted to talk about the role that friends play when you go out and drink. And we talked about how some friends help you have a great night out, and some friends kind of bring it down a notch. And one of my students made the leap of it's kind of like Chutes and Ladders. And so we built this whole Chutes and Ladders game, and you can buy blank board game parts online. And so we actually made legit board games and standard board game size, and sent these out across campus with students, and that was what our tabling day was in the spring. So we had all these students with these Chutes and Ladders games in different buildings on campus. And not that we expected students passing by to play a whole game, but just spin it and take it through one thing until you land on a square, and we can have a conversation about that, what that looks like. And so right now we're in the process. I've gotten this printed out. I found a company that would print it out onto a 20-foot square tarp. It's actually 4 10-foot square tarps, so it's a little bit more easily portable. And I'm building a website that will run like an app so students can play this in real time. If you're a participant, the side of your app is just going to be kind of a die for you to roll. And if you're a student facilitator, you're going to be able to say, okay, I'm running square 4. When somebody lands on square 4, I'm going to ask them this processing question, and all that content will be right there for the students to run this game. So I'm really excited about that. I really would love to develop a board game around healthy and unhealthy relationships. So if anybody wants to jump in on the creativity on that one, that's going to be one of my goals for this year. And I think that's where we're at. We're at Q&A.
Awesome. Wow. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Sorry, I was on mute.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay. So I didn't get any questions to come through the chat box, but if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to share with Rebecca now, you can put them in the chat box, and I will share them with her. But in the meantime, as you're thinking about questions or comments, I have 2 polls that I would again ask you to complete. So after this webinar, do you feel that you have increased your knowledge on creating more engaging prevention materials for your students? Yes or no? All right, I'm seeing responses come in. Thank you. I'll give it another few seconds so that everyone can take a moment to answer the question whether or not they feel that this webinar has increased their knowledge on creating engaging materials. All right, I'm going to move on to the next poll. Okay. Has this webinar helped you engage in a better coordinated response to sexual violence? Or, if you'd like to interpret it this way, the information from this webinar, will it help you engage in a better coordinated response to sexual violence on your campus or in your community? I'll give everyone another few seconds to answer the question. Okay, so I actually didn't get any questions through. Mostly, Rebecca, mostly just got thank yous and a desire for copies of the SUNY consent posters.
Okay.
So I'm going to be sending those out. Do you have a PDF of them? I think I have one.
If we just stay on the line for a second, I will pull up the page on my website and send everybody. I can put a direct link in the
Awesome. That would be great. Yeah, I actually have a couple emails that came in asking for it, so I'm not surprised. I also love that poster.
This is the direct link, this No Violence /SUNY one that will take you to the consent poster and the no violence stuff. And if there's other artwork that you saw, I'm happy to share. So just send me an email and tell me what you'd like to have a copy of, and we'll get it out.
Thank you so much.
And I do a lot of my work in InDesign. So if you're working with graphic designers, I'm happy to share those files as well, because I think a lot of times when we share, it's in PDF form or JPEG. But if you have something that you want to adapt for your own needs, I'm happy to send. It's an INDD file. So you know, we're all in this together. We're all fighting a really big battle together. So if I can save you some steps, I'm really glad to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's 100% true. This is really hard work, and knowing that we as colleagues can all come together and share the work that we've done, what's worked for us. I think it's just a really great part of being a member of this community. So I think that's really it for us today. As Rebecca said, here is her email. Feel free to reach out if you'd like specific copies of items. Here is my email if you'd like to join the Consortium listserv or have just general questions about the work that we do. And otherwise, we're going to end 4 minutes early so everyone can get back to preparing for orientation and getting ready for the school year. Thank you again so much, Rebecca, for spending this time with us, for doing part 1 and part 2. And thank you everyone who joined us. You're going to get an email this week with links to part 1 and part 2, as well as the PowerPoints. That'll be about that. So thanks everyone, and have a great rest of your day.
Bye everyone.